Hi, I'm Alex Elle, and I write books for a living. The Hey Girl podcast was created with sisterhood and storytelling in mind. Hey girl.
Hey girl.
Hey girl.
Hey girl.
I'll be sitting down with some phenomenal women to discuss love.
I believe we grew distant out of love of some type, I don't want to hurt you.
Loss.
Really don't know what's going to trigger that feeling of grief in any moment.
And a topic very important to my work, self-care.
I'm holding on to this self-care with every ounce of me.
Join us as we journey through sharing together. This week's guest is Laura Miller. The reason why I wanted to have Laura on the show is because we share a couple of things in common, but the main one being social anxiety.
When I started doing YouTube, it was one of the most challenging things of my whole life. I'm socially anxious. I'm an introvert. I wasn't the right person for it.
Laura's story is magnificent and brave, and she actually inspired me to share a little bit about my social anxiety and the depression that I've dealt with. I feel like with the internet, there's this lack of boundaries that people have.
Yes.
Because you're basically allowed to say whatever you want. We're talking about the ins and outs of using the internet and boundaries.
I'm so angry by the lack of compassion that people have, that there is a situation that they don't know enough about and maybe shouldn't say anything about it.
Yeah. I think you guys will appreciate this episode because it really dives deep into the behind the scenes. There are so many things that people don't see on Instagram and Twitter and YouTube and Facebook. You never know what someone else is going through. You never know how they're suffering. And being able to sit down and talk with Laura is a prime example of not only showing up for yourself, but speaking your truth without shame. This is Laura's story. Hey girl.
Hey girl.
Hey, okay, so we are here. How are you, Laura?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm doing good. I'm trying to stay cool in this hot DC weather, but other than that, I'm doing really good. It's so good to have you on the show.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I'm an avid listener.
Oh,
Hey girl.
That makes me really happy. I love when listeners say that. So I know a lot about you just from what you've shared on social media and me being a follower of yours and watching your YouTube videos and all that cool stuff. But for the guests who don't know who you are, just give us a rundown of who you are, what you do, and any other juicy stuff you want to add in there.
Okay. So, yeah, this is actually the big question of my life right now. What do I do?
Yeah.
I do food. I had a very tiny raw food dessert business in San Francisco. And I was part of this farmer's market where I would sell all my stuff. And the farmer's market was having really bad PR. And so they tried to do little videos on specific vendors, me being one of them. And that video randomly led to me doing Raw Vegan Not Gross, which was a YouTube show for a channel called Tastemade.
Yes.
And then that turned into also my cookbook that I put out last year by the same name, Raw Vegan Not Gross. So I do basically all plant-based food, and hopefully in a somewhat entertaining way, because I'm not necessarily the normal person that you would see doing food, because I don't know, I have a really low voice and I am not very chipper or something like that. I don't know.
Well, I love your videos. They crack me up. So there's that.
Thank you. Yeah, it's something I never imagined myself doing because I just don't feel like I'm the right person for it, but it ended up working out really well. Also, a big part of the last year was that I've had mental health stuff for the last 20 years. It's something that I actually put into I talked about a little bit in my cookbook about mental health. And then I went to all of my cookbook events, and that's pretty much all anybody wanted to talk about at my events, which was awesome. Yeah. And it seemed like people were really hungry for it. So I started a series called Talking in Circles last fall,
Yeah.
which was just about getting, like various people's voices on mental health and just dealing with life as a human. And then I dropped off the map because I was pregnant and having horrific depression. And I basically have been off the internet for a year.
Which is not a bad thing at all.
Yeah.
Keeps you sane.
It's yes, totally. But it's been a big year for me.
Yeah.
In a lot of ways. So that's kind of where I'm at now. And now I'm just resurfacing with some new Talking in Circles projects, but they're not out yet. So yeah, but I'm working on it.
Well, that's really awesome. And I'm glad that you touched on the mental health part of your journey, because that's kind of what I want to talk about. Of course, we'll tap into like raw, vegan, not gross and Talking in Circles, but I really wanted to chat with you about how your depression and social anxiety played a part in your pregnancy and post-pregnancy. So when you found out you were pregnant, what was your first and initial reaction? Was it pure joy, or was it like, oh crap?
I sobbed because I was at the time trying to get a bunch of my health stuff sorted out, including mental health. So I was really in the depths of a depression already. I was managing it more or less, but I had previously been on medication, which had essentially been a lifesaver for me. Basically, I started having really terrible night sweats and I couldn't figure out what was going on. Also, I was having just some dips. Anyway, I decided to try to come off the medicine in the year before that. And anyway, was trying to get a bunch of health stuff sorted, and in the process ended up becoming pregnant. So it was really kind of this scary moment for me, because I was like, I don't know if I'm going to be able to handle this. I don't know what pregnancy feels like.
Right.
I don't know how my mental health is going to go through this process. And I was terrified.
Yeah.
And for good reason, because it ended up being really a horrible, horrible time for me. And I hate saying that because, I have this beautiful daughter that came out of it. But it was, I fought my way through every day of that pregnancy for sure.
Yeah. Yeah. How did you fight through it? And how, you're married. How was your husband? I'm sure he was your biggest support system and cheerleader. How was that for you guys, navigating through the highs and lows of pregnancy hormones, but not only that, your depression and your anxiety?
My husband was a warrior. We talked through the entire thing. I mean, to the point where there's not much to say anymore except like, we just got to get through this.
Right.
And all of that. But yes, I mean, we had only been married for about a year. It's not a stress you want to put on your marriage at all. We were both just very aware of what the situation was, and that we just had to do essentially triage and cut out everything in our lives that wasn't totally necessary. Anything that could bring extra stress, anything that just like didn't feel good, because we were already in survival mode all of the time, essentially. Yeah. So it was really like, I mean, it sounds very dramatic, but it really was a dramatic situation. My mental health was so bad that we had to, just really cut everything out that wasn't important, whether that's, I don't know, really like situations, going to events that we otherwise would have gone to, people who would just bring a lot of stress into your life. Yeah. Things like that just had to be
at a minimum.
Yep.
No, I get
none of that.
I get that. Rewind, before pregnancy happened, what was your biggest hurdle within your mental health? I know that you talked a lot about your social anxiety, which we share that in common.
That's always fun.
That's always joyful. But I want to know how you navigated through that. Specifically, you're on YouTube, right? And you're open to everyone's outside opinions, and I know that can be triggering. You're on social media, and sometimes people have stuff to say on social media. Like, how did you protect your mental health while navigating through your work life?
This is such a huge deal for me. And honestly, yes, it's very perceptive of you, because when I started doing YouTube, it was one of the most challenging things of my whole life, because you're right, I'm socially anxious. I'm an introvert. I have before that had never performed ever, ever, ever.
Right.
Like I had never been on a stage. I had never done anything like that. And it's so all of that.
Yeah.
Like that's kind of what I meant before by I wasn't the right person for it. Like I'm like a very introverted in my head person, and that's not necessarily who usually goes to do something like that. So it was really difficult. I would go home every day and cry. My mom would text me that I had grit and that I needed to like have grit and I was going to get through it. And that's what I did. But yes, people commented on my weight, people commented on my voice, all of that. I had to basically just get through it. And I think it was good. It made me braver eventually. And, I've really had to go through it as like a second big round of that with this mental health stuff, because on Instagram, I said, look, I'm back on medicine. And it's funny. I remember when you were posting about your fertility journey and seeing some responses that you got, and I saw it while I was pregnant. And I remember how angry I was for you, that people were saying kind of like flippant things and trying to give you advice and things like that. Yeah. And just being like, oh my God.
Right.
Like, you don't
understand any, like people don't get it. And I feel like with the internet, there's this lack of boundaries that people have.
Yes.
Because you're basically allowed to say whatever you want online. And while I know most of the comments were coming from a good place, it's like, you're not in this space, and I'm sharing this very intimate side of me and my husband's life, because number one, we're not the only people who go through it, and number two, infertility isn't going to silence us, you know what I mean? So
right,
that's why we're speaking up. And while everyone's like, well, the internet, if you put on the internet, it's going to be open to opinion, but it's like, but not everything needs to have an outward opinion. Like, text your girlfriend, about your opinion about my, you know what I mean? I know that sounds kind of harsh, but it's like, I really don't understand, because I wouldn't do that. You know what I mean? I would never go on someone else's social media and just vomit out, just craziness. But, everyone's different. And that really triggered my social anxiety too. Just finding those boundaries and being able to gently decline people's opinions, but also
absolutely,
when Instagram came out with that turn off the comments thing, game changer for me.
That's I haven't posted it, and I post so very rarely right now.
Yeah,
that I didn't even know that was a thing now.
It's a thing.
Oh boy. That might put me back on the internet.
Might put you back on the map. But it's difficult, like dealing with, and okay, here's another thing I want to touch on. So you mentioned you were selling at farmers markets, and then having those in-person exchanges with people it's very daunting. I mean, I'm an introvert too, and I have to turn on my extrovertness, and then when I go home I have to recharge completely, because people, as much as they mean well, they drain me, and that's something that I've been trying to work on and deal with. But people see me and they're like, she must love people, she must love talking, she must love sharing, and it's like, oh my God, only if you guys knew, right? So
absolutely. I mean, if I'm being totally honest, the only way I was able to do those markets, they were night markets, so it was sort of like a party vibe, and I would just drink. Like I had like some of my friends would come and help me, and I would just have a bottle of tequila behind it, and like me and my introverted friends would just talk to a ton of people, and afterwards I would have to like get in bed for 3 days because I was so exhausted. It was so vulnerable for me because I was putting out this thing that I really cared about,
Yeah.
but also felt really conflicted about because it seemed like it was like the kind of food that I couldn't afford to pay for. Like I wasn't charging enough, and people would still say kind of rude or mean things, and I would have to be like, all right, I'm going to let that one go. Okay, moving,
Yeah.
So that kind of led into, the next stage of then YouTube, and it's just amplified even more. And then the next stage of,
right.
I put a book out, and then you put a book out, and
there's reviews for the
book.
Yeah.
And then you tell the internet that you have horrific depression and have just gone back on medication.
And then there's opinions.
People tell you that you're a bad mother. So, I mean, there's a lot of, yes. I mean, I absolutely understand what you're saying. I think it's really interesting how forthright people are with like giving advice on the internet.
Yeah.
I mean, if I'm being honest, it makes me so angry.
Yeah.
And that's part of why I've had to stay off the internet, essentially, because I'm so angry by the lack of compassion that people have and the lack of understanding that they do not understand.
Yeah.
Like that there is a situation that they don't know enough about and maybe shouldn't say anything about it.
Yeah.
And that they don't know your journey and that all of these things. So anyway, I was really feeling my pregnant, angry brain was reading the comments when people were commenting on your fertility stuff. And I felt so protective of you.
Thank you.
And which is weird because like I haven't met you in real life, but
not weird at all. I get that. I get it. Like I have my internet family and I'm like, stay away, So I feel
totally.
You.
Yeah. Well, and as a person who myself puts out pretty vulnerable stuff.
Yeah.
I saw that you were being brave and you were doing the same thing. And that's, to have those kinds of responses is just, it hurts.
It hurts.
And
it's
I get
tricky.
that.
Yeah, it hurts and it's tricky. But I've set up some pretty good boundaries. And I want to talk to you about that. Like, how have you set up your boundaries on and offline? And how have you intertwined self-care into motherhood, married life, and just individually?
That's a great question. Well, as far as the self-care that was most important to me as far as surviving the pregnancy, because I was in such a scary level of depression. I mean, I guess I haven't said this yet, but I was in the I don't want to be alive anymore version of depression. So again, it really was survival. And I took a lot of baths. I took a lot of walks. I listened to a lot of podcasts because I couldn't really interact with people very well, and podcasts became my friends, essentially. And I was really searching for other people's stories on pregnancy and depression and motherhood and things like that, because I felt completely out of my depth and I just didn't see anything out there about it. And this kind of goes back to what we were saying before, but it's part of why I do share about my story, because I know that I couldn't find enough about prenatal depression. And the like one or two things I found, like podcasts or blog posts or things on the internet, saved me. Like they saved me. They were like, oh, I am not the only person in the world that's going through this. And that's just so important as a human to know that. And my boundaries had to be so strong throughout, I mean, really through this whole process. And again, that's why I really had to take myself off the internet. And it wasn't a great time to do that because I had just put a cookbook out, 2 months before.
Right.
And I want my publisher to like me.
Yeah.
I want the book to sell really well. I had never not worked. And essentially I had to stop working. And, I didn't get married until I was 32 years old, but I'd never been in a place before where I was relying on a partner.
Right.
And so that was a whole different dynamic. I had to cut out everything that drained me at all.
Yeah.
And I kind of said this before, but I had to cut out, friendships where I felt like I was always a therapist.
Well, we're going to talk about that. Definitely want to talk about that.
So, it's not that I don't love those friends. It's just this isn't the season for our friendship.
Yeah.
Because I don't have it in me, and also I'm just trying to survive, and like nothing really feels like it compares to that. So I shouldn't have said that. It's not a comparison.
Right. No, I feel no. I definitely I get it. I get it all the way. It's tricky when you have to. I like that you said that not every friendship is for every season, specifically when you're dealing with mental health, because if you feel like you already feel like you're empty, right? And then you're constantly having to fill up other people. It's tricky, and it's not conducive to the healing process, at least for me. So with that being said, boundaries and self-care after pregnancy. So your baby is here and she's healthy and happy and beautiful. I know you said you're back on your medication. Have you felt like you're able to really be more present with the baby now that you feel, you're out of your depression? And how are you, other than medicine, catering to your mental health in a way that's gentle and uplifting? Because I know there has to be bad days even when you're on meds. So how has that been working for you?
Yeah. I mean, it's funny because I still had a resistance to going back on the medicine right after the birth. I had, read, I fundamentally don't want to be on medicine. It's just a requirement for me.
Right.
So I was like, oh, I've heard that, you can have your brain chemicals after you go through birth, can actually like kind of sort some things out for you. I was still sort of hoping, but I knew that I was probably going to have postpartum depression, given that I had a horrifically, depressed pregnancy.
Right.
So I got the medicine before birth. I got a therapist lined up before birth. I had a therapist, but she's still in the Bay Area where I'm from. So I was trying to get somebody in my area. I live in LA now. And basically we were trying to be fully prepared for the mental health stuff so that could, so that we would at least be on a baseline with how most other people are dealing with a newborn.
Right.
And that said, I got about 2 weeks in. I was trying to make sure that I was waiting for, the hormone dip that you get 3 days after the birth and all of that to sort of sort out a little. And then 2 weeks in, it was very clear that nope, I still have horrible depression and I'm not going to make it if I don't get on medicine.
Right.
So it was great because I already had it and I started it, and that essentially just puts me on a normal playing field. I wouldn't even consider it self-care so much as just putting me in a normal human space. And then above that, I mean, we still have a lot of boundaries.
Right. And you have to.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I'm very protective of my husband and my baby and my dog. So there's just a lot of situations we don't go into right now still. And the other part is we just survived the roughest year of our lives. So it isn't even just having a newborn. It's like we're still kind of recovering from that year plus a newborn, it takes a toll on your marriage and your body and your, there's a ton of stuff to sort out anyway. So
it's a lot of moving parts, I'm sure.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I want to move on to the creativity aspect, because What really made me fall in love with you was not only the frubes, because I have like all the shirts, your frube shirts, which are fruit boobs, which are fun, and your social anxiety necklaces. When I discovered you making your social anxiety necklaces, I had just come out of a really bad anxiety episode, and I had just written about it, my essay called Field of Flowers, on my internet journal thing, and it was a really hard time, really, really hard time for me. And I was looking for ways to use my hands and be creative and also include my family with that creative process. So when I found, the polymer clay necklaces that you were sharing, it was perfect timing for me. And I literally bought all the clay in Michael's and started kneading and rolling and flattening and making circles and just all this beautiful, stuff with my hands. And it really helped soothe my anxiety. So I want to know how you came up with that, and do you still make them, and how they have been helpful for you?
Oh, first of all, that just like kills me. That makes me so happy to hear. And you did it with Charlie, didn't you?
Yeah, I did. Yep.
I remember seeing that and being super excited. I've always had kind of side projects that help me get out of my head. I used to make a lot of fruit jewelry and like wigs made out of vegetables and stuff. That's kind of like what I used to do a lot of that on Instagram. But when I start doing things like that, my brain shifts. It's a really interesting thing is that I often remember my dreams from years and years ago.
Wow.
While I'm doing things like that. It's so bizarre. But that's how I know that I'm getting my brain really into a different place while I'm doing something. It actually happens a lot now with my baby.
Wow.
I'll be with her and that same thing, which I just think is so awesome and cool.
It is.
But working with my hands has always been something that's been good for me. For a while, that meant doing a lot of stuff with plants. And then for a while, it was, just side creative projects while I had a normal job or whatever. But it really is a necessity for me. And it's funny because I started making those necklaces. To be honest, I don't remember why. I think it was just like, oh, I found this clay. I really love the feel of it. I'm going to start playing with it. And then I ended up making so many of them that I actually wore them on my wedding day.
I saw that. They were so beautiful. Oh my gosh.
Thank you. That wasn't planned. I actually made them because I was going to have like the bridesmaids wear. Anyway, last minute I was like, I'm just going to throw all these on myself. And it was the best decision because
it was like a shield.
I was able to, yes, it was a shield. And I felt very much like myself because I was like, oh, this kind of weird handmade thing that's really, it's just me, is on me, and you can see it right when you look at me.
There's no avoiding
I don't have
it.
to pretend to be anything else because it's so obvious that this is what it is. Anyway, those kinds of projects are always so helpful for me, and I'm so glad that you connected with it because I didn't know if it'd be weird to put in video form. Like I didn't know if people were gonna get it because it's kind of just a thing that I would have like my friends do when they came over and like, hey, let's make necklaces. And this is fun to do while we hang out. But anyway, I'm really glad that you did that.
I love it. I love it. They were actually, a lot of them were actually hanging on my wall when I was done, like little decorations, and I ended up giving them all away to different friends who wear them.
I love that.
So it's just a really special thing, and I'm really glad that you shared it. So we are going to wrap up here in a second, but before we do, I wanted to get 3 tips from you that have helped with your social anxiety and depression. I know a lot of people feel like they can handle it by themselves, and I find it very admirable that you've not only spoken up about your boundaries with your depression, but that you need help, and that there's nothing wrong with needing help and leaning on people around you, i.e. your therapist. So top 3 things that you could give to someone who is in your shoes, or tips that you would give your older self, your younger self, not older self, tips that you would give your younger self, whatever feels right to you, I would love for you to share that.
Number one would be find your people, because having even one person in your life that you can be honest about the situation with and that isn't going to judge you and that tells you, yes, this is real, you're not crazy.
Mm-hmm.
Like, that is so incredibly important. For me, that's my husband, because throughout this process, what has saved me is him looking at me and being like, you're not just a bad person. This is real.
Mm-hmm.
There's so much shame in all these mental health issues that even that just in and of itself is such a huge deal. Number two would be, and especially if you can't find your people, would be to get really professional help, whether that is a counselor, a therapist, a psychologist, a doctor, a priest, somebody who can help you find the resources that you need, because it's so overwhelming, especially when you're in a bad place, to try to, okay, what's my treatment plan for this?
Yeah.
Like, what are the steps I'm supposed to be taking? And you really need to have somebody at least checking in with you for those kinds of things. And number three would be water. Getting in water, drinking water. I'm not able to swim right now, really, because I don't have, that's hilarious to say because I live in LA, but I'm on the opposite side of town and I never go to the beach here. But baths, drinking water, washing your face, like, water is a reset for me. And I take it very seriously. And staying hydrated can really help with anxiety. I think those are my three.
Awesome. Thank you. This was really
Thank
good
you.
and fun. I mean, I love how, the conversation just flowed and was really random, which is fun and great. But no, seriously, I appreciate you opening up to me about this. And I really honestly feel like your story is going to resonate with so many women. And it's just, extremely admirable that you were able to chat with me about this.
Thank you so much. And everything you're putting out right now is making me braver.
No.
So it really means a lot to me. So thank you so much for having me.
Yes, of course. Hey Girl is a member of the District Productive Network. Produced by Jamie Benson and me, Alex Elle. Music provided by DC's own Kokai.